also seen labor actually take some unprecedented steps around Gaza, and this year we about half of the organized or unions representing about half of organized labor have actually come out and called for a ceasefire. Do you think that's influenced by what's happened since 2020, or do you think that that is some different factors at play there?
I think it's twofold. I do think it is influenced by what's happened since 2020 because I do feel a lot of younger workers, and I think this is what we're seeing at the conventions and where these things are coming up. You know, whether we're talking about the UAW, whether we're talking about SEIU, whether we're talking about APWU, whether you're a postal worker inside of the building, whether you are working at Waffle House, whether you are, you know, to some degree involved in your union and a grad student, or if you're an auto worker, a young auto worker. People have been affected by these things that have been happening since 2020. They've been involved in the things that have been happening since 2020. In certain states like Michigan, of course, where the auto workers are so strong, you have a lot of Arab auto workers who are talking to their friends and coworkers as well. So I think you have a mix of these various factors, but I very much think, and what I've heard and what I've been able to glean from people in the labor movement, this has been a major factor, is that labor leaders are seeing that younger workers want to see their unions speak out on this issue because they recognize, you know, not only how unjust it is, but they have been a part of a broader stream in the past several years that have brought together a lot of these economic and racial justice issues with issues like self-determination for the Palestinian people.
Yeah, and just a tangent is that I do a lot of my work in the environmental and climate movement space, and we've seen a lot of younger climate activists basically also wanting climate organizations and climate movement folks to be actually more outspoken and more taking more action on Palestine, which with the more mainstream groups, we've seen a lot of resistance to that. They're just like quiet on it, right? Unless there's some, you know, even with the campus uprisings, we didn't actually see a lot of speaking out from like some of the more mainstream environmental groups.
No, I think that's a good point. And one quick just corollary I'd hear
Also,
that,
they're very tied to the Democrats too, those
yes.
mainstream Enviros. I just want to point that out too.
No, for sure. And I mean, you know, and it speaks to a greater question. I mean, and one I just want to note quickly, the Union for Southern Service Workers, which is like low wage workers at like Family Dollar and Waffle House, they actually marched to the student encampment at UNC as part of their May Day demonstration, which shows how some of this is coming together. But I think the point you're making about the environmental groups is big because, I mean, the difference with unions in a way is, and churches for that matter, we talk about the AME church, is the money is generated by the people who are members of the institution, right? And I think so many of our organizations, not just in the environmental movement, but in many movements, you know, are operating out of this NGO industrial complex foundation-based world, which is very mainstream, very ruling elite, you know, very tied to the Democrats, very just like, you know, you can rock the boat a little bit, but only within the red lines that we've determined the boat can be rocked. And I think for our social movements moving into 2025, seeing that every single issue, especially the climate, is only getting worse in drastic ways, I think we have to think more seriously about how do we do our grassroots fundraising? I mean, you know, there are many critiques I can make of Bernie Sanders, but it is notable to me that between 2016 and 2020, he raised $400 million in grassroots donations. And so many of us who are struggling, like, we need only a fraction of that to quadruple the actual work we're doing on the ground. So how do we actually start to move to funding models that make it easier for us to take bold stands? I think is a big question emerging from this situation in Gaza.
Yeah, absolutely.